Right, so thank you everybody for coming along to Positive Nature Network. This is an opportunity for us to share knowledge and to help each other to run our businesses in a more sustainable way. We've got Kit Connell here, who's going to be sharing his knowledge with us later. That's part of our knowledge sharing. We've also got the opportunity to network with people who share our values. So, you know, this will allow us to build supply chains and customer bases that are fit for a sustainable future. After Kit's talk, you're going to have a chance to meet like-minded souls, as there are many on this call, and find out about each other and reflect a bit on the talk. Many of you have been thinking about these issues for many, many years. I know that. Some of you are just starting out on, if you want to call it, a sustainability journey. Everyone's welcome here. Our aim is to create a space that we all come to in a spirit of curiosity and courage to help each other to do business better, and to really try and support one another. So if you'll allow me, I want to just start with a quick story to set a bit of context for today. A couple of you might have heard this before. If you have, I apologize, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I think it's relevant to setting the scene. So on the wall behind me, there's a map of an island which some of you may recognize. This is actually Iceland, and I have Iceland on my wall because it's a place that is very close to my heart. I love, and I've been a couple of times. I just want to tell you a little bit about that experience for a couple of minutes before we get going with Kit's talk. So when I went to Iceland, first of all, in 2015, I took my young children and we went to a place called Vatnajökull. Vatnajökull is way up here in the sort of south of Iceland, and it's the largest glacier in the whole of Europe. It's absolutely immense. It's very difficult to sort of comprehend the size of this block of ice. Huge volume of ice. And we went along. We didn't really know what to expect, and we came to this amazing glacial lake at the bottom of part of the glacier. And this glacial lake had a kind of outlet glacier coming into it and carving off these enormous icebergs, huge icebergs that would float into the lake, and then they'd float down through the lake and through a little river and out into the sea, and then they'd nestle up onto this incredible black sand beach and make these kind of beautiful ice sculptures. It's just one of the most otherworldly, bizarre places I've ever been. Now, it was so beautiful, we thought, well, we must go back there again one day. And so 5 years later, we went back again to this same spot, this same glacier, this same incredible glacier lake. And when we got there, it was actually quite profoundly shocking to see that the wall of ice that had been about 4 or 5 kilometers away when we went there the previous time had moved back an entire kilometer. So it had melted away a kilometer's worth of ice, and actually the volume of ice that had disappeared in those 5 years was the volume of Wembley Stadium 150 times. So if you imagine a block of ice the size of Wembley Stadium and stacking together 150 of those, just how much ice had disappeared in this one glacier, in this one place, this one country, one part of the world. And that for me was a really profound kind of awakening to just how quickly this stuff is happening in our world. And the fact that we need to wake up, and I needed to wake up and try and do what I can about it. So that was my kind of story from Iceland. One more little story from Iceland before we move on towards Kit doing his talk. There's another little glacier placed just up here, and it's called Jökull. Jökull is the Icelandic word for glacier, if you're wondering, which you may well not be. But the story of Ok is a really interesting one. Ok is no longer there. So Ok used to be a glacier. When I first visited Iceland, it was a glacier, but now it's a plaque on a rock for future generations to read. And the plaque says the following, which I just wanted to read for you. It says, Ok is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you'll know if we did it. I think that's quite a poignant thing, but it's also a real good identifier of the fact that nature is vulnerable, that there's so much that needs protecting and that needs us to think and to care about. And so there's a huge amount to be done, and it impacts actually on all of us, our lives and our businesses in many different ways. And that's the context for which we need to get involved in these kind of conversations and support each other to become more sustainable in what we do. So there's a lot to be done, and that there's a lot that we can all contribute to avoid these kind of climate change impacts becoming worse over time. So this particular event, this Positive Nature Network event, is actually the last event we're running in 2022. And I just wanted to give you a quick flavour of all of the different topics that we're going to be discussing in sessions next year, because we're planning all kinds of exciting things and really hoping that you guys are going to come along the journey with us and bring along other businesses as well. We're going to have sessions on energy savings. We're going to have sessions on waste reduction and recycling, on circular economy, on sharing resources, on transport, renewable energy, on biodiversity and how that impacts on business, on new sustainable industries like seaweed farming, on rewilding and on regenerative business, on nature connectedness and on funding opportunities for sustainable business. So many different topics, so much interesting stuff to learn from some incredible expert speakers. So talking of incredible expert speakers, without building you up too much, Kit,
yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, that's okay. For today's session, we're going to be focusing on cutting through the carbon jargon. So if you don't know the difference between your emission scopes and your elbow, or if you have net zero idea where to start on your sustainability journey, we are very lucky to have with us today an incredibly knowledgeable and lovely individual who is highly engaged with this stuff and who helped to inspire my business on our journey to do more for the planet. He spends his days helping organizations communicate and improve their ESG credentials, and also transition to net zero. So please welcome today's speaker, Sustainability Growth Manager at Planetmark, is Mr. Kit Connell. Over to you, sir.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you so much. And lovely to meet everyone here. What a lovely, lovely network that you've created already. And so excited to be part of it and so excited to see where it goes. But yeah, I'll just share screen with you. Hopefully you can all see that. So just to run you through a rough agenda for today's session, I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to Planetmark, who we are and what we do. I'm also going to cut through some of the jargon that there is, and I think the sustainability sector has kind of shot itself in the foot because there is a lot of different terminology that's utilised, lots of different acronyms, and it can be quite confusing. So yeah, we're going to do a little session on net zero, what it means for you, your business, and for society in general. And then I'm going to talk about the business case for sustainability, and we'll go through some questions as well. But yeah, similar to what Richard said, and a kilometre of ice disappearing before his very eyes. Like, how bad does it have to get in order for us to actually implement the necessary change? And I don't want to cover this too much because it's in the media constantly, but we've got to bear in mind that 6 million people are still in urgent need in Pakistan. We've had horrendous fires in North America this year. We've even had it in our own country. We've had the hottest day on record ever in the UK, and we've had fires on our doorstep. This graph very clearly highlights the predicament that we face. Is the carbon dioxide level parts per million in the last 400,000 years. And you can see that big spike coinciding with the Industrial Revolution. we as Homo sapiens are to blame for this climate crisis. There's no doubt about that. And I think it's also important to mention is that there's 1,000 different issues when it comes to sustainability with 1,000 different solutions. And I wish, from the bottom of my heart, I wish that somebody had all the answers, but unfortunately they don't. It's very complex, and the climate crisis is just one of 9 of the planetary boundaries that we're overlapping. But who is Planet Mark, and what do we do? So we're a certification that goes only to organisations that can demonstrate that they're committed to decarbonisation. One of the stipulations of the certificate is that we have to see a year-on-year reduction of at least 2.5%. We want far more than that, of course we do, but that is the minimum requirement for recertification. We've broken it down into 3 really simple parts, steps, if you want to call them. Measurement. You've got to have that baseline in place. You cannot manage what you don't measure. Engagement. We want to engage staff, clients, stakeholders on the importance of sustainability. And then the last piece is communication, is to go boldly and demonstrate your achievements when it comes to decarbonisation, and so that others can follow. A bit about our credentials. We were started in 2013 in collaboration with the Eden Project. We were one of the first UK sustainability companies to receive official partner status to the UN-backed Race to Zero. You might have seen our big battle bus last year in the build up to COP26. This is an electric bus that toured right around the UK, and we were chosen by the government to deliver that. And we're also retained by Google to provide net zero services to SMEs in the UK through online engagement and knowledge events as well. Got a big old community. We work with 600 odd businesses going horizontally across industry. We know every single industry needs to decarbonise, and also varying in size. So we work with really small companies, you know, there might even just be one person in the company, right to some pretty big boys like Fortnum and Mason, Charles Tyrwhitt, Lazard, for example. But why net zero? So there is a legal duty for sure. In 2019, there was an amendment to the UK's Climate Change Act, which means that every single UK business must reduce their greenhouse gases emissions to net zero by the end of 2050. There's also other UK legislation like SECR, ESOS, although that's not really relevant for SMEs because that's only relevant for organisations that have got over 250 employees. So there's also the moral duty. You know, I'm a zoologist by education. You know, always loved the environment, loved nature and protecting it. But climate change is one of the greatest threats Homo sapiens have ever faced, ever. And we are in the 6th mass extinction of planet Earth. And as I mentioned before, we are to blame for that. So for me, it's a case of how can we become the best stewards of the land? How can we protect Earth? How can we stop the extinction of species as a moral duty? But from a commercial point of view, it's almost becoming a no-brainer as well to become more sustainable. Investors, consumers, they're all calling for greater transparency from businesses in their operations and their impact on the environment. And, you know, having a credible net zero strategy will be the cost of doing business. You might have seen COP27. You might have, you know, followed it closely, but you might have thought that, oh, I'm an SME, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter for my business. But it does. It will matter for your business because we call it the regulatory waterfall. So you've got the international regulation, COP27, you've got standards like science-based targets, that informs national strategy and targets. What that does is set the rules and regulations for companies and industries to abide to. And then what that has is an effect on suppliers to those big companies because of scope 3 emissions. And if you don't know what scope 3 emissions are, no worries, I'm going to cover that in just a couple of minutes. But yeah, this slide really just highlights the point. So you've got the international regulation policy, goes down to national governments, goes down to large organizations. And then if you are in the supply chain of large organizations, you will be sure that it will affect you. And I think this highlights it to a T. So Tesco last year delivered this email to their suppliers. And it basically stated for the suppliers to disclose carbon emissions, set a net zero target by the end of 2022, set science-based targets as well, and switch to renewable electricity. And if you don't, your contract is in doubt. So it's that trickle down effect, which it will affect SMEs for sure. But, you know, what is net zero? Let's talk about that. And in order to talk about net zero, we first must understand the different scopes of emissions. So forgive me if you're already fully aware of this, but again, it can be quite complex. So there's the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the most universal method of measuring greenhouse gases. And what the protocol has done is broken it down into 3 scopes. So you've got your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 are your direct emissions. Those are the emissions associated with the burning of fuel, burning of gas, putting your fuel within your company car. Scope 2 are the indirect emissions. These are the emissions associated with the generation of electricity at the power plant, for example. And scope 3 is everything else. So scope 3 includes the emissions associated with your waste, with your water, with business travel, with your employee commuting, with the emissions associated with your investments. That can be a real tricky one to measure. The emissions associated with your procurement choices. You know, what are the emissions associated with that printer within your office? What are the emissions associated with, I don't know, getting legal services? That's incorporated into your scope 3. But carbon neutral v net zero. So there is a lot of confusion. I see it every day, people using carbon neutrality and net zero interchangeably, when in reality, they're quite different. So we want organizations to get to net zero. That is our goal. What does that mean? It means the measurement of your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and a reduction of 90%. Then the last 10%, which might be impossible to get rid of, that's when you can look at offsetting projects like tree planting, like seagrass, like direct air capture technology. So it's hard. It's hard to get to net zero. Carbon neutrality, on the other hand, is once you've measured your scope 1 and scope 2, it's advised to measure your scope 3, but it's not mandatory. And you can offset those emissions and you can call yourself carbon neutral. So it is really important to understand the difference between net zero and carbon neutral. Net zero, really difficult. We need a reduction of 90%. It's not going to look like this smooth line. You know, that's a dream world. It might be a jagged line. You might, for instance, I don't know, put LED lights in all of your offices and that will save X amount of carbon. You might electrify your fleet. That might save another X amount of carbon and so forth. So it'll be a bit of a jagged line. But yeah, carbon neutrality, all you need to do is offset your emissions once you've measured your scope 1 and 2. I hope that's clear for everyone. So business case, why should you as an SME go down this route? First and foremost, millennial employees in particular are very loyal to organizations that care about their effect on society. Deloitte did a study that indicated that it's actually 79% of millennial employees are loyal to organizations that can demonstrate that they care. Grow profits, customers, investors, reward sustainable businesses. You can future-proof your business by understanding the long-term effects of social and environmental issues. Now, I'm sure a lot of you, owning businesses have seen a hit on energy in terms of your budgets. Energy bills have gone up dramatically. The cheapest unit of energy is the unit of energy that you don't use. You're also retaining staff. And then there's the transparency piece. It's about being totally honest and transparent, and people reward that. People like to see that honesty. It builds trust. And then, sad to say it, I feel like we are certainly in the 11th hour of this climate crisis, and it's super depressing looking at the news. But if you go down this route, you're still going to gain a competitive advantage, even though we are in the 11th hour. And then, it's that triple bottom line. Yeah, looking at social, economic, and environmental, or in other words, people, planet, and then profit as a triple bottom line. That's what we should be aiming for. I just wanted to highlight some of the companies that have really put this well and truly at the forefront of their business. And these are companies that I just love. And, Patagonia, for instance, the owner has dedicated all of his profits to fight climate change. And yet people are still cynical and skeptical and go, oh, yeah, but he's only doing it to save some tax. And I just think, God, what can somebody do in this world? If they want to do something that's really good, they're still going to get scrutinized. And Too Good To Go, really interesting app. More than a third of food is wasted. It's the largest business to consumer app for surplus food. And when you've got the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, saying that the number of people affected by hunger has doubled in the last 3 years, you start to think, oh, okay, food issues are going to be right at the forefront of the news every day. So yeah, this year's cost of living crisis will be tomorrow's potential starvation crisis. Maybe not for us here in the UK, but it's a pretty bleak picture for many regions of the world. Triodos Bank, I've actually just signed up with these guys. Really amazing bank. Only invest in positive renewable energy companies, or anything to do with sustainability. Really, they will try to invest in. They do not invest in any sort of fossil fuels, and it just means that you can put your money to good use with banks if you're selective. And then just to kind of wrap it up, I suppose, what can you do as a business? I would always say, try and get that baseline in place, try and get that measurement in place, because you cannot manage what you don't measure. If you don't know your baseline, no matter what you do, whether you're putting in LED lights or doing whatever, more recycling, you're not going to understand the amount that you're reducing as a percentage of your overall carbon footprint. And then, the second step, engagement. Try to, I'm sorry, I've gone on too far there. Set up a green team in your company. See what volunteering options there are within the community. You have internal competitions about, who can save the most carbon. Lead by example. Start the sustainability conversation with your suppliers, with your clients, with your partners. It's not that difficult. And then communication. We avoid greenwashing at all costs. There's no point in saying things that you're not doing, but create a dedicated space on your website for sustainability. Start to identify and share your sustainability stories on social media. you know, we're social animals at the end of the day. We're not too far removed from apes, and you know, we monkey see, monkey do. If we can see other people doing things when it comes to sustainability, people are more likely to follow. So lead by example, and that kind of ripple that you have in your community, in the business network, hopefully will become a wave of change given some time. But yeah, it's what can you do next? If you want to have a quick conversation with me, I'm more than happy to walk you through what you could do as a business in order to reduce your carbon. We've got a CPD accredited training session. If any of you were interested, you can have 50% off. They're CPD points, continual professional development. So you'll get accredited with those. And we also have loads of free toolkits that you can utilize, whether that's for energy, travel, procurement, waste, or water. So that's a little bit about Planet Mark. It's a little bit about net zero and the different scopes of emissions. Hopefully you'll understand the difference between net zero and carbon neutrality. We've had the bit of the business case. Why is it important? You know, it's a no-brainer from a business point of view to display your credentials and to actually walk the talk and do as much as possible. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. I think I'm on the kind of 20-minute mark now, and I'll pass over to Richard.